Today, Rob, Ellen, and I will be discussing the history and culture of satire. Satire is derived from the Latin word satir, meaning poetic medley. As well as this, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, satire is the use of humour, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticise people's stupidity or vices, particularly in the context of contemporary politics and other topical issues. A satirist's work may ridicule governments, countries, groups, or maybe individuals. The author of satire will continually try to make the audience aware of what the satirist thinks is the truth. They try to alter or reinforce a reader's view on something, sometimes using very excessive technique. The two main and very different types of satire are Horatian and Juvenalian. Horatian satire focuses on topics in a more humorous and impersonal light, whilst Juvenalian places its attention on topics in a bitter and personal way. Juvenalian satire is a deliberate, offensive, and often personal critique of an individual or idea, whilst Horatian satire mocks an individual or idea in a more humorous, light-hearted manner. Throughout the years, satire has changed people's opinions in many different ways. Firstly, we will talk about satire from ancient Rome and Greece. Satire was not actually described as a specific genre until Quintilian, a Roman rhetorician, stated that it was. It was also not until even later that a Greek playwright called Aristophanes used this form of verse in a series of plays, referred to as Old Comedy. Old Comedy was a collection of plays that varied in style, depending on where they were performed, though the actors remained primarily in ancient Athens. It was in these plays that satire became similar to how it is known today. After the fall of Rome, and before the beginning of the early Middle Ages, the creation of Greek and Roman satirical plays just seemed to stop. Satire was reintroduced around the 12th century, but this time it mocked songs and literature. This period also marked the introduction of a type of satire that tried to define what was right or wrong, mocking the unchristian behaviour of certain figures. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is an excellent example of mocking literary satire. By the Age of Enlightenment, in the 17th and 18th century, satire had become deeply ingrained in modern society. The rise of the conflict between the Whig and Conservative parties of the British Parliament fuelled the use of political satire. Later on, popular satirical authors of the Victorian era, which was from 1837 to 1901, came about. This included Charles Dickens, who satirised the legal system and the attitudes to the welfare of the working class, and Mark Twain, who satirised the 19th century American society in his book called Huckleberry Finn. A Modest Proposal was a Juvenalian satirical essay made in 1729 in which the author, Jonathan Swift, suggests that the only way the impoverished Irish might ease their economic trouble was by selling their children as food for rich gentlemen and ladies. This essay satirises the rich, especially the rich English, as it makes them seem heartless towards the poor and makes them seem as though they view Irish people as a commodity, as they denied the Irish human rights. At the time of the poem, Ireland's economy was in a dire state and could not sustain itself, with the population of the country being too large. Of course, the proposal was obviously not serious. It was more of a mere criticism of the time's conditions, but the way it was written really urges the reader to also criticise with Swift as well. Satire was also used in Charlie Chaplin's 1940 film called The Great Dictator, with the satire falling upon Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The film was used as political propaganda to convince viewers during World War II that Hitler was manic and ridiculous in his anti-Semitic views. In the video shown on this slide, Hitler's parody is Adenoid Hinkle, played by Charlie Chaplin, and is shown to be giving a lengthy and energetic speech. This interpretation of Hitler makes him seem almost like a lunatic. In recent years, an increasing number of Western television shows have applied varying forms of satire to their programmes. In the United Kingdom, the programmes The Now Show, which has been on air since 1998, and Have I Got News for You since 1990, regularly use satire. Mock the Week, another well-known programme, is also often quite satirical as well. At the bottom of the screen, there is a link to a part of a Have I Got News for You episode, in which some satire of mostly atheists and the bus companies agreeing to this advertising, and also partly people from Croydon, is shown. It makes these atheists seem totally against the religious groups that do not believe there is a God. But you'll have to see the video to really understand. Modern versions of satirical prose are commonly political. There are many websites and magazines, such as Private Eye and The Onion, which are purely satirical. We found The Onion to be particularly interesting in the way that it mocks other news companies by presenting boring, mundane events in the format of a traditional news website. This satire is demonstrated by their slogan, America's Finest News Source, which is very sarcastic, as they do not actually provide any news. Their headlines are designed to be comic as well. For example, Hit and Run driver kills prominent member of deer community. This particular story exaggerates the death of this deer by using an array of satirical devices. For instance, the use of mock heroic, which uses elevated diction to describe the commonplace deer. The quote, "She was just so full of life," is a witty pun, as the doe is now dead. The story aims to present the world in a crazy upside-down way, as shown by the fact that a local buck is interviewed in the story. This personification contrasts with the rest of the story, as everything else is fairly common but presented in an exaggerated way. We also found that art was used as a way of criticising political policies, parties and legislations. Focusing on satirical cartoons, we found it interesting how they display public figures, ridiculing them in different ways, and if and how this creates an impact on the viewer. Looking at different forms of satirical art, the use of exaggeration is common. In caricatures, like the picture on the furthest left, physical features are drawn out of proportion or in an abnormal shape to generate humour. On the far right, the cartoon entitled The Plum Pudding in Danger generates humour by the contrast in facial expressions in the two different characters. Illustrated in 1805, after a peace settlement between Britain and France, it shows the two superpowers fighting over territory as well as food. At first glance, the cartoon seems humorous, but looking at the details of the picture, such as which parts of the globe the British and French representatives are cutting into, as well as the context of the illustration, the political message the cartoonist is trying to put across becomes more obvious. Satire uses many literary devices to further grab the reader's attention. One of the most used of these devices is irony. The meaning of an ironic piece is different or the opposite to what the underlying meaning is. For example, in The Unknown Citizen by W.H. Auden, it is ironic that a poem of praise for the man described would begin on such an unenthusiastic point as the lack of the man's official complaints. It is also ironic that Auden focuses on statistics and how systems register and restrict people's behaviour rather than on the freedom and happiness of people. These two things being mentioned later on in example quote number 2. This irony helps to highlight the fact that Alden is trying to satirise bureaucracy in the... Exaggeration is also used in satirical pieces to further bring the reader on the side of the author. Again, one can bring an example from The Unknown Citizen. The fact that the person described in this poem only had a gramophone, a radio, a car and a Frigidaire, and apparently had everything necessary to the modern man, is obviously exaggerated, as this man would have needed other things like food and water as well. One other device that is sometimes used in satire is parody. Most of the time, a parody will be a mimicked version of something well known. For example, nowadays there are many different parodies for well-known songs. Again, The Unknown Citizen makes use of a parody. The poem states that the man described has worked for Fudge Motors Inc., which sounds quite similar to Ford Motors Inc., the leading auto company of the time of the poem. Ford was known for mass production and its assembly line, where there would have been no individuality and no creativity, meaning this man would not have been able to show his personality. This point is reinforced by example quote number 2. Surprise and unexpected events are also techniques used in satire. These techniques result in the reader being left wondering why this change of events has occurred. An example is when E. Cummings uses a rather insignificant last sentence in his poem, next to, of course, God America. And drank rapidly a glass of water is a surprising ending to a poem that mostly alludes to a patriotism of the United States, as there is no other information given to this rather irrelevant point in the poem. However, it also adds an element of satire, as Cummings mutes the babbling voice of the speaker with this line, who has rambled on in an over-patriotic manner, suggesting Cummings does not like this type of person. Another example of a literary device used in satire is comic juxtaposition. This is when two or more words are together in a sentence but are out of place. One example of this is when friendly and bombs are juxtaposed in the poem called Slough by John Betjeman. This further accentuates Betjeman's hatred of Slough, as he unexpectedly links weapons of mass destruction with an adjective which suggests helpfulness. Thank you for listening to our possibly quite tedious presentation. We hope you enjoyed it,